My friends, let us come together in a spirit of quiet receptivity. Let us set aside for a moment all the noise that surrounds this subject, all the debates, all the arguments, all the claims and counterclaims that have filled the world with confusion. Let us meet here, not to defend a position, not to prove a point, but to rest in the gentle recognition that truth reveals itself only in stillness. There is much said today about Christ consciousness. Some embrace it with enthusiasm. Others reject it with fear or suspicion. Many are uncertain, pulled between voices that speak loudly in opposite directions. One group declares that this teaching is the highest revelation. Another insists that it is deception. And between these two extremes, the sincere seeker is left wondering what to believe. But, my friends, truth is never found in argument. It is never discovered in controversy. It does not reveal itself through noise, excitement, or emotional persuasion. Truth appears only when we become quiet enough inwardly to let the still, small voice be heard. The question, is Christ consciousness a deception, arises only when we have mistaken the Christ for something external to ourselves, or when we have imagined that the Christ is a personal attainment, a human achievement, or an elevated identity of the ego. These misunderstandings have spread far and wide, and because of them, many who seek honestly have been turned away from the very truth that would set them free. So, let us begin by laying one foundation, and let this foundation remain clear in your mind throughout our time together. Christ consciousness is not a theory, it is not a philosophy, it is not a belief system, nor is it a psychological process. Christ consciousness is not something invented by human minds, nor is it a modern innovation. It is the eternal truth of your being, the truth that Jesus revealed, the truth that every mystic has discovered when they turned within and found the presence living itself at the center of their own being. We are not here to concern ourselves with what the world says about Christ consciousness. The world speaks from fear, from misunderstanding, from personal opinions. We are here to concern ourselves with what the Spirit reveals. And the Spirit speaks only one language, the language of inner recognition. You see, all confusion arises when we attempt to understand spiritual reality from the level of the human mind. The human mind wants definitions. It wants clear categories. It wants to say, this is right and that is wrong. This belongs to my group and that belongs to another. This agrees with my doctrine, and that must therefore be dangerous. But the Spirit does not speak in such terms. The Spirit reveals itself in the silence of I. For 2,000 years, the world has spoken about Christ as if Christ were a person, a man separate from us, an individual far removed from our own nature. And because of that, the world has struggled and suffered, searching for God outside, seeking salvation through external forms, never realizing that the very essence of the Christ is the presence that announces itself silently as I am. It is only when we forget that the Christ is the inner light of every soul that we fall into fear and suspicion. It is only when we imagine that Christ is something we can own, defend, or monopolize that we become hostile toward anything that appears to challenge that image. But truth is not threatened by anything. Truth has no fear, for truth is the presence of God, infinite, eternal, and indivisible. So today, let us set aside the fears that have been taught to us. Let us set aside the belief that Christ consciousness is something strange or foreign. Let us forget, for the moment, the voices that have told us it is dangerous or deceptive or contradictory to the teachings of Jesus. Instead, let us come together in a spirit of openness, humility, and quiet expectation. Let us be willing to hear what the Christ within reveals when all personal opinions are set aside. Christ consciousness, as we shall discover, is not a replacement for Jesus. It is the very life that lived as Jesus. It is the presence that spoke through him. It is the light that he embodied so perfectly that humanity could behold it. And that same light is the truth of your identity. You do not attain Christ consciousness, you awaken to it. You do not create it, you recognize it. You do not make yourself worthy of it. You discover that it has always been the essence of your being. This is where we begin, not in fear, not in argument, not in human interpretation, but in the quiet realization that the Christ is not something external to be judged, but something internal to be revealed. Let us walk gently, my friends, for the subject before us is holy, and as we move deeper into this exploration, the controversies will fade away, and the truth will stand on its own, simple, clear, and self-revealing. My friends, before we can determine whether Christ's consciousness is misunderstood or misrepresented, we must first become clear about what the term actually means. And we must become clear in the only way that spiritual clarity ever comes, not through definition alone, not through intellectual analysis, but through recognition. For spiritual truth does not enter through the mind, it reveals itself through the soul. So let us sit quietly for a moment. Let the mind grow still. Let the questions fall away. Let the personal opinions soften. And in that silence, let us listen for the inner meaning of this word Christ, which for so long has been spoken about, argued about, defended, misunderstood, and yet so rarely recognized. When I use the word Christ, I am not speaking of a man. I am not speaking of Jesus's human identity. I am not speaking of a personality who lived 2,000 years ago. When I speak of the Christ, I am speaking of the divine presence that animated Jesus, the Spirit that performed his works, the light that spoke through him and said, "I and the Father are one." That light did not begin with Jesus, and it did not end with Jesus. It is the eternal self of every individual waiting to be recognized. Christ is not a person. Christ is the spiritual identity of every soul. Christ is the presence of God appearing as individual being. Christ is the universal selfhood of all who have ever lived and all who ever will. Jesus revealed the Christ. He embodied it. He expressed it without obstruction, but he did not possess it as something unique to himself. He demonstrated it so that you and I might also awaken to that same presence within our own being. This, my friends, is the radical clarity that dissolves confusion. The Christ is not something outside of you. The Christ is the truth of you. Now, let us consider the second word, consciousness. What do we mean by that? Consciousness is not thought, nor is it emotion. It is not belief. It is not imagination. Consciousness is awareness. It is the dimension of your being that knows, that recognizes, that perceives, that is aware of itself as existence. Consciousness is the I that you experience before you attach any qualities to it. When you say, "I am," you are speaking from consciousness. When you say, "I exist," you are speaking from consciousness. When you are silently aware, without words, without concepts, without images, that is consciousness. Therefore, Christ consciousness is the awareness of your true identity as the Christ, the recognition that the presence of God is the very essence of your being. Christ consciousness is not a new identity you attain. It is the original identity you awaken to. It is not a higher version of the personal self. It is the absence of the personal self. It is not the elevation of the human mind, it is the quieting of the human mind, so that the divine mind may shine through. This awareness is not reached through strain or effort. It reveals itself. In the same way light appears when clouds part, it was always there, hidden only by a passing veil. The human sense of self says, I am a person, I am separate, I am vulnerable, I am lacking. Christ consciousness reveals, I am the life of God, individualized. I am whole. I am supplied. I am protected, not by force, but by the nature of being itself. The human mind says, I must become spiritual. Christ consciousness whispers, you already are spiritual. You must only realize it. The ego declares, I can achieve. The Christ declares, I can of mine own self do nothing. The Father within me doeth the works. This is the difference between the world's misinterpretation of Christ consciousness and the truth that Jesus revealed and that I have sought to teach. The world imagines that Christ consciousness means personal greatness or special abilities. But in truth, it is the end of personal sense, the end of self-will, the end of the belief in separation. Christ consciousness is not the glorification of the human being. It is the disappearance of the human being into the realization of divine presence. When you recognize the Christ within, you do not become more of a person. You become less of a person and more of the presence that has always lived as the reality of your being. This inner recognition quiets fear, dissolves judgment, releases resistance, and allows healing to occur naturally because you are no longer resisting the activity of God as your life. So let us be clear, absolutely clear. Christ consciousness is not a trend, not a doctrine, not a belief, not an invention of any era. It is the eternal nature of your being, revealed by Jesus, taught by the mystics, and discovered by all who have turned within and found the same presence looking back at them as their own eye. And now, with this foundation, we can move deeper. We can begin to examine why so many misunderstand this truth, why some fear it, why some condemn it, and why the world has stumbled over a revelation meant to set humanity free. My friends, when spiritual truth becomes spoken of in the marketplace of human thought, when it is carried from one mind to another without the inner realization that gives it life, it is easily distorted. And because of this, the world has developed many misunderstandings around the idea of Christ consciousness. These misunderstandings are not malicious. They arise simply because the human mind attempts to grasp what can only be known by the Spirit. Let us gently, lovingly, and quietly explore these misunderstandings, not to condemn those who hold them, but to see through them, so that the truth may stand unveiled. The first misunderstanding is this, that Christ consciousness is the claim that the human self is divine. Many fear this. They say, how dangerous it is to tell people they are God. What deception lies in telling humanity that it needs no Savior, no Redeemer, no grace. And indeed, if someone were to say, my human personality is divine, my ego is God, that would be deception. It would be delusion, for the ego has no spiritual substance, no permanence, no reality, but, my friends, Christ consciousness never glorifies the ego. It reveals its nothingness. It does not say that the person is divine. It says the person is an appearance through which the divine may shine when the personal sense dissolves. If you have ever truly touched the inner presence, even for a moment, you know that it does not inflate the self, it silences it. It does not exalt the personality. It removes it from the center entirely. It does not make you feel powerful. It makes you feel transparent, as though the presence of God were the only life living itself through you. The second misunderstanding is this, that Christ consciousness replaces Jesus or diminishes his role. Some fear that this teaching takes away from the uniqueness of Jesus, that it denies his divinity or rejects his mission. But nothing could be farther from truth. Christ consciousness does not reduce Jesus. It reveals the true magnitude of what Jesus embodied. It honors him not merely as a man to be worshipped, but as the perfect vehicle of the Christ, the light that is the life of every soul. When Jesus said, "The works that I do, ye shall do also," he was not diminishing himself, he was elevating us. He was showing us that the same presence that operated as his being is the presence that constitutes our being. To recognize Christ within yourself does not dishonor Jesus, it fulfills his teaching. The third misunderstanding is this, that Christ consciousness is a quest for power, manifestation, or spiritual superiority. This misunderstanding arises because the human mind looks for advantage, for accomplishment, for something it can attain, and so some have taught Christ consciousness as though it were a method to gain spiritual strength, attract material good, or achieve mystical abilities. But this is not Christ consciousness. This is the ego seeking spiritual clothing. The true Christ reveals its own nature. I can of mine own self do nothing. This is the heartbeat of Christ consciousness. It is not the assertion of personal power. It is the surrender of personal will. It is the recognition that God, the infinite invisible, is the only presence acting through us as life, as mind, as supply, as love. The fourth misunderstanding is this, that Christ consciousness is part of an occult or New Age movement. This belief arises because in the absence of true understanding, people group ideas together based on words rather than on essence. They hear phrases that sound unfamiliar, or they encounter individuals who use the term loosely, without reverence, without realization, and so they assume that Christ consciousness is simply another modern trend. But, my friends, Christ consciousness is ancient. It is older than Christianity, older than religion, older than any sacred text. It is the eternal truth of being existing before Abraham, before Moses, before the prophets, before the world was formed. It is the I, the divine awareness, that is the very foundation of your existence. The problem is never the term. The problem is always the level of consciousness from which it is spoken. When spoken from the human mind, Christ consciousness becomes a concept, misunderstood and misused. When spoken from the Spirit, it becomes the revelation of the one presence, the one power, the one life, expressing as all. And so the confusion arises not because Christ consciousness is deceptive, but because human interpretation is always limited. The mind tries to grasp what can only be lived, and when the mind grasps, it distorts. When the Spirit reveals, it illumines. Let us therefore be very gentle with those who fear this teaching. Let us be patient with those who condemn it. They are not opposing truth. They are protecting the image of truth they have inherited. They fear the loss of the familiar. They fear anything that appears to challenge their understanding of God and salvation. And fear, my friends, is only the result of not yet having felt the presence within. For when Christ is recognized as the inner light of your own being, all fear dissolves. All resistance falls away. And you discover that what once seemed threatening is, in fact, the very truth that leads you into freedom. Let us move forward now, deeper into the heart of this matter, and see what the Christ truly is when all misconceptions are set aside. My friends, now that we have seen the misunderstandings that cloud this subject, let us turn our attention to the true nature of the Christ. For unless this is clearly understood, everything else will remain confused. Everything else will remain tangled in the beliefs of the world. And the Christ, which is simple, which is ever present, which is nearer than breath, will seem distant, mysterious, and veiled. Let us begin with a very quiet realization. The Christ is not a religious term. The Christ is not a theological idea. The Christ is not a historical figure. The Christ is the living presence of God, individualized as your own being. It is the spiritual identity of every soul, whether recognized or unrecognized, whether realized or unrealized. It is the invisible, infinite essence of life that stands behind the appearance of form. It is the silent reality that Jesus embodied and revealed when Jesus walked this earth. What made him the Christ was not his body, not his birth, not his lineage, not his personality. What made him the Christ was his transparency to the presence, his utter absence of personal selfhood. His life was a window through which the Father could shine without obstruction. He did not possess the Christ possessed him. He did not claim divinity for his human self. He surrendered his human self so completely that only the divine remained. And so, the Christ is not something Jesus had that you do not possess. The Christ is not a special attribute reserved for one man. The Christ is not the exclusive property of any religion or any doctrine. The Christ is the universal presence of God expressed as individual being. Now, let us be very clear. This does not mean the human personality is divine. It does not mean your human opinions, your human emotions, your human desires, your human ego are the Christ. No, the Christ is the I behind the I that you speak every day, the spiritual identity behind the human name, the divine essence behind the human life. When you say I am, before you add any description to it, before you say I am tired, or I am discouraged, or I am joyful, or I am afraid, there is a pure I that stands alone. That I is the Christ. It is the light that Jesus spoke from when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He did not mean I, the man. He meant the eternal I that spoke through him. This is why he could say, before Abraham was, I am. Not I was. Not I existed, but I am. The Christ is timeless. The Christ is birthless and deathless. The Christ is not bound to form, yet expresses through form. The Christ is not limited by matter, yet appears in matter. The Christ is not the body, yet animates the body. And this Christ, this eternal divine identity, is the truth of every individual on the face of the earth. It is the same in the saint and in the sinner, though recognized in one and hidden in the other. It is the same in the wise and in the ignorant, though shining through one and veiled in the other. It is the same in those who embrace it and in those who deny it. Christ is not created by belief. Christ is not destroyed by disbelief. Christ is the reality of being. You see, my friends, the moment you separate Christ from yourself and place it on a pedestal, far away, belonging to another, you lose the message Jesus came to reveal. The world has worshipped Jesus while missing the Christ. It has adored the messenger while ignoring the message. It has elevated him so high above humanity that his teaching became impossible to follow. But Jesus did not come to show what one man can do through special divine favor. He came to show what God is doing every moment as the life of every individual. His mission was not to create worshipers. His mission was to awaken sons and daughters of the living God to their true identity. Now let us consider another clarity. The Christ does not deny the human experience. It does not ignore pain. It does not pretend suffering is unreal on the human level. It does not call the body unimportant or the world illusion in a careless way. But it reveals that these appearances do not define you. They do not have power over your true being. They are not the final truth of what you are. Christ consciousness, in its purity, does not say, deny your experience. It says, do not identify with your experience. There is a vast difference. When you look at your life and say, I am sick, you give the condition your name. You place the label of divinity upon a passing appearance. But when you look at the same condition and say inwardly, the I that I am is not touched by this appearance, then you are resting in the Christ. You are recognizing the truth behind the form. You are acknowledging the presence that stands where the problem seems to be. The Christ is not about escaping life. The Christ is not about transcending responsibility. The Christ is not about withdrawing from the world. The Christ is the light that reveals reality within the world. The Christ is the presence that lifts consciousness out of fear even while the outer experience continues. The Christ is the inner assurance that nothing real can be harmed and nothing unreal can endure. And so let us gently come into this recognition. The Christ is the divine self of you, not your ego, not your personality, not your intellect, not your emotions. The Christ is the presence of God, living itself as you, speaking itself as you, moving itself as you, being itself through you. When this is seen, even dimly, even faintly, the fear of deception melts away, for nothing can deceive the one who recognizes presence. Nothing can mislead the one who has found the source within. Nothing can frighten the one who has discovered the divine I behind all appearances. Let us hold this quietly in our hearts as we continue deeper into this revelation. My friends, having opened our hearts to the true nature of the Christ, it is now time to speak with loving clarity about something that has misled many sincere seekers. It is a gentle warning, not a rebuke. It is an invitation to discernment, not a call to judgment. For in the world, there are two versions of what people call Christ consciousness. One is born of the Spirit. The other is a product of the human mind. They share the same words, but they do not share the same essence. They use the same language, but they do not lead to the same realization. Let us explore this with patience and humility, so that the inner truth may stand revealed without confusion or fear. The first version, the ego's interpretation of Christ consciousness. There is a form of teaching abroad today which uses the term Christ consciousness but does not carry the Christ within it. It speaks of awakening, but what awakens is not the spirit, it is the ego in spiritual clothing. It speaks of power, but the power it seeks is personal. It speaks of manifestation, but the things it desires to manifest are the objects of human want. It speaks of divinity, but it assigns divinity to the personal sense of self. This version says, you can become godlike. You can command the universe. You can shape reality as you choose. You can elevate your human self to divine status. My friends, the Christ has nothing to do with such claims. These are the longings of the human mind seeking spiritual authority. They are attempts to turn the infinite into a servant of personal desire. They are efforts to use God rather than surrender to God. This version of Christ consciousness is not wicked. It is simply mistaken. It is born from the belief that personal will can be infused with spiritual power. It elevates the person instead of dissolving the person. It seeks to acquire instead of to yield. It pursues experiences instead of presence. And because of this misunderstanding, many fear Christ consciousness and call it deception. They see this ego-centered version and assume it represents the whole. But this is not the Christ. It is the echo of the human mind trying to touch the divine without relinquishing itself. The second version, the Christ consciousness Goldsmith taught. Now let us turn to the true version, the version that Jesus embodied, the version that the mystics discovered, the version that I have spent a lifetime attempting to reveal. This Christ consciousness does not elevate the human self. It reveals its unreality. It does not make the ego powerful. It dissolves the ego entirely. It does not give you spiritual authority. It reveals that only God is authority. It does not teach you to manifest. It teaches you to rest in the fullness that already is. This Christ consciousness whispers, of mine own self, I can do nothing. The Father within me doeth the works. I and the Father are one. The kingdom of God is within you. Here, no personal self remains to claim anything. Here, no human agenda survives. Here, no earthly desire can persist in the light of the presence. And because there is no personal self seeking its own fulfillment, there is peace, profound, unshakable peace. There is a sense of harmony with all life. There is a natural flow of supply that requires no manipulation. There is healing not as a miracle performed by a person, but as the natural consequence of resting in the presence that is already whole. This is the Christ consciousness that Jesus lived. This is the Christ consciousness that reveals itself in pure silence. This is the Christ consciousness that removes all fear of deception, for it removes the very self that could be deceived. The difference between the two versions. And so, let us state the distinction simply and clearly. The ego's version says, I become greater. The Christ version says, the personal I disappears, and the divine I am shines forth. The ego's version seeks power. The Christ version relinquishes power, for God alone is power. The ego's version wants to attract things. The Christ version recognizes, the Father knoweth what things ye have need of. The ego's version tries to create reality. The Christ version beholds reality already present. The ego's version looks outward. The Christ version looks inward to the still sanctuary of being. One inflates the human self. The other reveals the divine self. One speaks loudly. The other speaks in the whisper of inner silence. One creates confusion. The other creates peace. One leads away from God. The other reveals that God has never been absent. Why this clarification matters. My friends, it is essential to distinguish these two versions gently and clearly, because many reject the true teaching after encountering the false one. They see the ego's imitation, and they recoil from the entire subject. They turn away from the very truth that could liberate them. But when the heart hears the authentic message, the message of surrender, of silence, of inner recognition, all fear dissolves. For the true Christ, consciousness is nothing more and nothing less than the presence of God revealing itself as your own being. There is no danger in this. There is no deception in this. There is only peace. There is only light. There is only the gentle unveiling of what you already are in reality. Let us now continue deeper into this sacred truth, so that the confusion of the world may fall away and the clarity of spirit may speak within us. My friends, if we desire clarity about the true nature of Christ consciousness, there is no higher authority than the words of the Master himself. For Jesus did not come merely to be admired. He came to reveal the inner light, that is the life of every individual. He did not come to display personal greatness. He came to unveil the presence that stands behind all form. And so today, we turn to his own statements, for within them lies the spiritual key to Christ consciousness. Not a theory, not a philosophy, a living revelation. Let us approach these words not intellectually, but quietly. Let us allow them to enter not the mind, but the heart. 1. I and the Father are one. My friends, this one statement, when truly understood, is the whole of Christ consciousness. When Jesus spoke these words, he did not speak as a man declaring his uniqueness. He spoke from the Christ, revealing the universal truth of being. He was not dividing himself from humanity. He was revealing the nature of all creation. I and the Father are one does not mean the man Jesus was one with God while you remain separate. It means that the divine I, which spoke through Jesus, is the same I that is the life of every soul. The Father is the invisible source. The Christ is the expression of that source. And the I of you, the real you, the spiritual you, is that expression. This is not arrogance. This is not blasphemy. This is not self-exaltation. This is recognition. This is the moment when the veil of separation dissolves, when you realize that your life is God's life, that your being is God's being, that your existence is God's expression. This is the first step into the Christ. 2. The Father within me doeth the works. Here lies the end of personal ego. Here lies the death of the belief that we are separate, individual beings with private minds and private powers. Jesus did not say, I perform miracles through spiritual techniques. He did not say, I heal with my mind. He did not say, I manifest through personal mastery. He said, the Father within me doeth the works. This is the essence of Christ consciousness. God is the only presence. God is the only mind. God is the only power. God is the only doer. And when the human self steps aside, when the personal I falls into silence, the divine I am shines forth, and healing occurs naturally, not as a supernatural event, but as the activity of reality revealing itself. When you know, even in a small measure, that the Father within you does the works, you cease struggling. You cease trying to fix the world. You cease attempting to manipulate circumstances. You enter the rest that Jesus lived in every moment. This is Christ consciousness. 3. The kingdom of God is within you. With these words, Jesus removed God from every external location. He removed God from the heavens above. He removed God from temples and holy mountains. He removed God from rituals and systems. He removed God from doctrines and institutions. He placed God in the only place where God can ever truly be realized within you. Not within your mind, not within your emotions, not within your imagination, but within your consciousness, the silent, living presence at the center of your being. Every spiritual journey that seeks God outside must eventually fail. Every attempt to reach God through external means must eventually collapse. Every religious practice that overlooks the inner kingdom remains incomplete. Christ's consciousness begins when you turn inward, not to find something new, but to discover what has been there eternally. 4. The works that I do, you shall do also, and greater works than these shall you do. My friends, this is not poetry. It is not metaphor. It is not exaggeration. It is spiritual fact. Jesus did not come to declare his superiority. He came to reveal your identity. He came to show what God can do when a human sense of self no longer obstructs the fullness of the presence. When he says, "You shall do the works," he is saying, the same Christ that lived as me lives as you, not the ego, not the personality, not the conditioned mind, but the eternal Christ, the divine I, the presence of God manifesting as individual being. He was not elevating humanity through flattery. He was unveiling reality. Do not let the world convince you this is heresy. Do not let fear tell you this is presumption. Do not let doctrines tell you this is reserved for one man. If only one man on earth was one with the Father, then the teaching of Jesus would be a contradiction. But if the Christ is the light which lighteth every man that cometh into the world, then the teaching is fulfilled. This is why Christ's consciousness is not deception, it is destiny. 5. Lo, I am with you always. What is this I? It is not the man who lived in Galilee. It is not the historical personality. It is not a figure that comes and goes in time. This I is the eternal presence, the divine identity, the Christ within, the light that is the life of every soul. When Jesus says, "I am with you," he means the divine presence is your own being. It cannot leave you. It cannot abandon you. It cannot be lost. When you discover this, fear dissolves, loneliness dissolves, suffering softens, and you awaken to the truth that you have never been separate from God for one instant. This is the heart of Christ consciousness, bringing his words together. His statements form a single, unbroken revelation, oneness with the Father as the doer, the kingdom within, the universality of divine realization, the eternal presence of the I am. These are not the claims of a human being. These are the declarations of the Christ, speaking through the transparency of Jesus. When these statements are heard inwardly, not as beliefs, but as revelations, the personal sense of self begins to dissolve, and the divine self begins to shine through. That shining forth is Christ consciousness. Let us hold these words in silence for a moment, letting them enter deeply until the meaning begins to awaken from within. My friends, now that we have looked upon the words of the Master, let us move into the living of these truths. For Christ consciousness cannot be reached through intellect, through emotion, through repetition, or through effort. It is not attained as one attains a skill. It is not acquired as one acquires knowledge. It is not summoned as one summons a power. Christ consciousness is recognized. It is revealed. It is awakened from within. It is allowed, not achieved. It is permitted, not produced. And so our task is not to climb toward God, but to remove the veils that hide the presence already here. Let us walk gently through the essential practices that reveal this inner light. Not techniques, but openings. Not methods, but recognitions. 1. The still moment. Be still and know. Every realization begins with stillness, not physical stillness alone, though that helps, not forced quietness, though silence is its friend, but the inner stillness in which the personal self loosens its grip. Goldsmith taught what Jesus lived. You cannot know God while the mind is busy trying to know God. You cannot receive the Christ while asking the Christ to come. You cannot hear the still, small voice while shouting your desires into the silence. So we enter a sacred moment not to think, not to ask, not to repeat, not to imagine, but simply to rest in the presence that is already here. In that moment, we gently let go. Let go of trying to reach God. Let go of trying to understand truth. Let go of trying to fix life. Let go of trying to become spiritual. And in the quiet that remains, the Christ begins to reveal itself. 2. The practice of recognition. I am is here. Recognition is not affirmation. Recognition is not positive thinking. Recognition is not mental repetition. Recognition is simply awareness of what already is. Goldsmith would enter meditation not to change conditions, but to recognize the presence that stands behind conditions. Quietly, inwardly, he would rest in the recognition. I am the presence of God being itself, not the body, not the mind, not the personality, but the invisible presence expressing as this being. This is not something to repeat mechanically. It is something to feel softly, inwardly, like a whisper from within your own being. As you rest in recognition, the human sense of I begins to soften. The boundaries of personal identity dissolve. You feel the shift from me trying to realize God to God realizing itself as me. This is the beginning of Christ conscious awareness. 3. Impersonalizing appearances. This is not about me. One of the profound keys Goldsmith taught is this: no discord has anything to do with your true identity. It is the impersonal activity of universal belief appearing in your experience. When you say, I am sick, I am afraid, I am struggling, you place the holy name of God, I am, on what is not truth. But when you say inwardly, this appearance is not personal. It is not about my spiritual identity. It is only a universal belief showing itself. You withdraw the power that sustains the appearance. This does not deny the human experience. It denies that the experience defines you. Christ consciousness is the recognition that no condition can touch the divine identity that you truly are. When you stop taking appearances personally, you stop giving them power. And when you stop giving them power, they dissolve, not always instantly, but inevitably. 4. The inner listening. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. Christ consciousness is not discovered through speaking to God. It is discovered through listening. There is a presence within you that knows. There is a wisdom within you that guides. There is a love within you that heals. There is a peace within you that restores. But this inner teacher speaks in silence. Goldsmith would say, do not pray for anything. Become still and listen. Listen not with the ears, but with the heart. Listen for the wordless assurance that rises not from your thoughts, but from the very ground of your being. Sometimes the silence itself is the answer. Sometimes the peace itself is the guidance. Sometimes the stillness itself is the healing. Christ consciousness is a listening state, a yielding state, a surrendered state. 5. Resting without agenda. Thy will be done. One of the greatest obstacles to Christ recognition is the desire to use spiritual awareness for personal outcomes. When you enter meditation hoping to fix the body, you remain identified with the body. When you seek supply, you remain identified with lack. When you seek peace, you remain identified with fear. But when you enter meditation with no agenda, not to get, not to solve, not to change, you step into the atmosphere of the Christ. Christ consciousness has no purpose other than the revelation of God. When God is revealed, everything else unfolds naturally. You cannot serve two masters. You cannot seek spiritual truth while secretly seeking personal benefit. Rest in the presence and let the presence take care of what belongs to it. This is the way of the Christ. 6. Recognizing the Christ in others. Inasmuch as ye have done it unto the least of these, Goldsmith taught that the Christ in you cannot be realized fully until you begin recognizing the Christ in every individual. This does not mean approving their actions. It does not mean ignoring their faults. It does not mean excusing their behavior. It means seeing beneath the surface appearance, seeing the same divine identity in them that you are discovering in yourself. This recognition shifts your entire relationship to the world. People cease to be obstacles. People cease to be enemies. People cease to be sources of threat. They become mirrors through which you learn to see the same Christ light shining everywhere. This recognition is not sentimental. It is not emotional. It is a spiritual act that dissolves the sense of separation. And when separation dissolves, Christ's consciousness emerges. 7. Returning again and again, a daily unfoldment. Christ consciousness is not attained in a single moment. It is the fruit of daily recognition, daily surrender, daily listening, daily resting. Goldsmith's realization unfolded over decades, not because God is slow, but because the human sense must loosen gradually. Each moment of recognition plants a seed. Each moment of stillness lifts a veil. Each moment of impersonalization dissolves a false belief. Each moment of inner listening unveils a new depth, and over time, sometimes suddenly, sometimes quietly, a shift occurs. You begin to live more from presence than from personality, more from spirit than from thought, more from Christ than from self. This is Christ consciousness. 8. The natural fruits: peace, guidance, healing, supply. Goldsmith never pursued these fruits. He simply recognized the presence, and the fruits followed naturally. Peace comes, guidance comes, healing comes, supply comes, harmony comes, not because you sought them, but because the Christ presence is harmony itself. You cannot seek Christ consciousness for results, but the revelation of the Christ always expresses itself as wholeness. This is the law of spirit. This is the nature of reality. This is the fulfillment of Jesus' words. Seek ye first the kingdom, and all these things shall be added. My friends, these practices are not steps. They are openings. They are doorways. They are invitations to allow the presence to reveal itself. Christ consciousness is not gained. It is unhidden. You do not transform yourself into something divine. You remove what hides the divinity already present. Let us move now into the heart of this transformation, into what happens when this inner recognition becomes lived, embodied, expressed. My friends, let us now enter the sacred territory that few dare to describe, not because it is forbidden, but because it cannot be understood until it is lived. And yet, it is helpful, comforting, and clarifying to hear what unfolds when the Christ begins to take form in your consciousness. For this is not a sudden event. This is not a thunderbolt from the sky. This is not a blinding illumination that leaves the personality transformed in an instant. This is a gentle quickening, a quiet awakening, an inner shift that changes the entire foundation of how you live, how you perceive, how you respond, how you exist. Let us walk through this slowly, reverently. 1. The dissolving of fear, the first evidence that Christ consciousness is dawning within you, is not spiritual power. It is not mystical ability. It is not the attraction of good fortune. It is the dissolving of fear, not through willpower, not through courage, not through affirmations or positivity, but through recognition. When the presence within you becomes real, not as belief, not as hope, not as imagination, but as inner certainty, you discover that nothing external has power over your life. Nothing external can touch the reality of your being. Fear dissolves not because life becomes easier, but because you cease to live from the part of you that can be frightened. The personal self fears. The Christ self does not. When you live from the Christ within, fear simply loses its foundation. It has nothing to cling to. It cannot take root. It cannot grow. You become anchored not in emotion, but in presence. 2. A quiet inner authority emerges. When Christ consciousness begins to operate, a new form of inner knowing arises. Not arrogance, not confidence, not boldness, but spiritual assurance. You begin to feel, I need not be shaken by appearances. I need not rush to fix. I need not defend. I need not resist. I need only rest. This inner authority is not the authority of the human will. It is the authority of the presence that says quietly, I am here. This is the same presence that stood calm before the winds at Galilee, the same presence that walked through crowds unharmed, the same presence that said, Peace, be still. When Christ is realized, this authority becomes your atmosphere, not because you claim it, but because it reveals itself. 3. Problems lose their power over you. My friends, this is perhaps the most transformative shift. Problems may still appear, but the sense that they are your problems dissolves. You begin to see every challenge not as a personal burden, but as an opportunity to rest in truth. A financial problem appears, but the anxiety is absent, for that supply is the infinite fullness of God, and that supply cannot be withheld. A health concern arises, but the panic is gone, for the body is not the source of life, and life cannot be threatened. A relationship conflict surfaces, but the defensiveness is missing, for the Christ in you meets the Christ in the other, and harmony unfolds through recognition. Problems do not magically vanish. Your relationship to them transforms. And because of that transformation, the problems begin to shift, dissolve, reorganize, or pass away. Not through effort, but through consciousness. 4. Daily life slows into presence. One of the signs that Christ consciousness is unfolding is that your whole experience of time changes. You move more slowly, not physically, but inwardly. There is a sense of spaciousness around every activity. You perform ordinary tasks with a quiet awareness of the presence accompanying you. You do not rush. You do not strain. You do not live reactively. You begin to experience what Jesus meant when he said, My peace I give unto you. This peace is not the absence of activity. It is the presence within activity. You may be busy outwardly, but inwardly you are resting, listening, abiding. Your life becomes a continuous meditation, not something you do, something you are. 5. Healing occurs in a new way. Healing no longer comes from trying to fix the body or the mind or the world. Healing comes from the revelation of truth. You begin to witness, not imagine, not affirm, not hope, that every condition of discord is the manifestation of a false belief. And the moment truth is recognized, the belief loses its substance and the appearance dissolves. Healing becomes natural, unforced, effortless, sometimes gradual, sometimes sudden, always peaceful. Christ consciousness does not heal as a power. Christ consciousness reveals that there is nothing to heal in the first place, only truth to be known. 6. Supply becomes a flow instead of a pursuit. You cease chasing after good. You stop trying to attract prosperity. You stop believing there is something external you must obtain. Instead, you begin to feel the presence of God as the fullness of your life. Supply comes as needed, not through manipulation, but through recognition. Opportunities appear without striving. Resources arrive without desperation. Solutions present themselves without effort. Why? Because the Christ knows no lack. And when you abide in the Christ, you leave the consciousness of lack entirely. 7. Relationships are transformed. When Christ's consciousness begins to reveal itself, you cease seeing others as personalities. You see beneath the surface. You sense the divine identity in everyone, even those who oppose you. Judgment dissolves. Resentment dissolves. Grievance dissolves. You no longer try to change people. You no longer try to correct them. You no longer need them to be different. You rest in the realization. Christ is the truth of them, whether they know it or not. And this recognition itself begins to heal the atmosphere of every relationship you touch. People around you feel safer. They soften. They respond differently, not because you attempt to change them, but because the presence you carry changes the space in which they stand. 8. An unseen radiance begins to shine through you. You may not notice it at first, but others will. A calmness, a clarity, a quiet depth, a presence that cannot be explained. You do not preach. You do not persuade. You do not try to convert. Your presence itself becomes the message. You become, unconsciously and without effort, a transparency for the light of God. This is the ministry of presence Goldsmith spoke of. It cannot be taught. It cannot be learned. It cannot be practiced. It is the natural radiation of the Christ realized. People feel healed simply by sitting with you. People feel more peaceful after speaking with you. People feel hope in your silence, not because you are special, but because Christ is present and Christ alone does the work. 9. The personal self gently falls away. This may be the most profound consequence. The sense of me begins to dissolve, not in a frightening way, not in a dramatic way, not in an annihilating way, but gently, like mist evaporating in the morning sun. You stop defending the personal self. You stop glorifying the personal self. You stop fearing for the personal self. You stop relying on the personal self. And in the absence of this false me, the true I, the Christ, shines unobstructed. This is not the death of identity. It is the revelation of your real identity. 10. Life becomes a living unfoldment of God. Eventually, Christ consciousness brings you into a state where you live entirely from the realization that God is the life of me. God is the mind of me. God is the love of me. God is the being of me. God is the infinite, invisible expressing as me. You cease planning life. Life unfolds. You cease controlling life. Life moves. You cease fearing life. Life reveals. You live spontaneously in harmony, guided not by thought, but by presence. This is the life Jesus lived. This is the life the mystics discovered. This is the life Goldsmith revealed. And this quietly, simply, gently, is the life that becomes yours when the Christ is realized within you. My friends, this is not imagination. This is not theory. This is not wishful thinking. This is lived experience, the fruit of recognition. Now let us complete our journey with the final section, the gentle closing of this unfolding. My friends, We have walked together through a sacred path, not a path of belief, not a path of doctrine, but a path of inner recognition. And now, as we come to this concluding moment, let us not think of this as an ending, for truth has no ending. Presence has no boundary. Awakening has no final chapter. This is not the close of a teaching. This is the beginning of a life. A life lived from a deeper center, a quieter foundation, a truer identity. Let us rest together for a moment in silence, for in silence the Christ speaks. And now, hear these words not as instruction, but as invitation. 1. You do not need to become anything. Let this truth settle gently. You are not on a journey to find God. You are on a journey to remove what hides God. The Christ you seek is not far off. It is not waiting for you in the future. It is not revealed through attainment, achievement, or struggle. It is the light within you, already shining, already present, already whole. There is no distance between you and God. There is only unawareness. And awareness returns the moment you become still. 2. The Christ within you is not fragile. You may fear that this awareness can be lost. You may worry that this peace will fade. You may wonder whether today's clarity will be tomorrow's confusion. But hear this quietly. Christ consciousness does not begin in you, and therefore it cannot end in you. It is eternal. It is infinite. It is God's own presence expressing as your being. What fades is not the Christ. What fades is the veil. And each time you turn inward, each time you rest in the presence, each time you listen, the veil grows thinner until one day it dissolves. 3. The world does not need your power, it needs your presence. You may be tempted to go forth and fix the world, to teach others, to convince them, to correct their misunderstandings. But that is not the way of the Christ. Christ does not persuade. Christ does not argue. Christ does not strive. Christ shines, and in that shining, the weary find rest, the fearful find peace, the suffering find hope, the lost find direction, not because you have spoken, but because the presence has flowed through you. This is the ministry of presence, the silent healing that operates through the realized Christ. 4. Your only work is recognition. Let us leave all complex spiritual practices behind. Let us put away the techniques, the systems, the formulas. Let us walk gently, quietly, simply. Your work is not to change the world. Your work is not to fix the body. Your work is not to transform the mind. Your work is not to improve the personality. Your one spiritual task is this: recognize the Christ as the reality of your being. Recognize it in stillness. Recognize it in silence. Recognize it in the midst of activity. Recognize it in others. Recognize it behind appearances. Recognition is the doorway. Recognition is the unveiling. Recognition is the realization. And realization is the healing. 5. You are not alone on this path. Every seeker who touches the Christ enters a universal communion, a communion not of bodies, not of minds, but of spirit. Those who walk this path before you walk with you now. Those who awakened in centuries past support your awakening in this very moment. The presence that revealed itself to Jesus reveals itself through you. The light that illumined the mystics illumines your path. The infinite company of the Christ is with you, is within you, is you. You walk in holy companionship. 6. When you forget, simply return. There will be days when the presence feels distant. when the world seems louder, when fear tries to rise again, when old patterns show themselves once more. Do not be discouraged. Do not judge yourself. Do not imagine that progress has been lost. Simply return. Return to the still moment. Return to the gentle recognition. Return to the inner sanctuary. Return to the infinite invisible. Every return deepens you. Every return strengthens you. Every return reveals more light. This is how Christ consciousness unfolds, gently, quietly, inevitably. 7. The Christ is your true identity. Live from it. There is nothing left to seek, nothing left to become, nothing left to achieve. Only this remains. Live from the awareness that Christ is the reality of your being. Let this awareness guide your thoughts. Let it soften your responses. Let it shape your actions. Let it illumine your relationships. Let it steady your steps. Let it anchor your life. And in living this way, you will discover that you have awakened not into a new belief, but into reality itself. 8. A final blessing. My friends, rest now in the quiet confidence that the presence that revealed itself to you today will continue to reveal itself hour by hour, moment by moment, as you turn inward. May the Christ that Jesus embodied and the Christ that Goldsmith unveiled shine forth through your consciousness as peace, as guidance, as healing, as abundance, as love, as truth, as life, not by your effort, but by God's grace, not by your will, but by God's presence, not by becoming, but by recognizing you are the light, because the light is the eye of you. Rest now in that truth. Abide in it, live from it, and let the Christ be the way, the truth, and the life of all that you are. Amen.